Hi, I'm Liz Vaughn, one of the worship leaders here at RPC Richmond and Missouri City, as well as West End. I am a single mom. I'm a mom of two beautiful boys, and I have one angel. Worship is that thing that you do to access the Father. You know, that's how we access His power and His love. Jesus, the worship is important in those times where you don't feel like you can push through. February of 1994, when my mother passed away, the bottom dropped out. And I tell people it's like my feet lifted off the ground. I pushed through those times, and then fast forward several years later, March of 2016, my 20-year-old son was murdered. And that feeling came back again. You know that you've been given this really strong foundation. You know you felt it for yourself, what God can do, what He will do. And then you get gut punched. Something happens to you that you never, ever thought would knock on your front door. I just knew that there was a new purpose in my life. I started searching, for what it is that was gonna make some sense out of this. And I met some other moms who had lost their children. And I realized that I was supposed to help them. And Push was born. Push is my grief support group that I started. And it allows me to pour all of those things, all of the hurt, all the pain, all the emptiness, just the whole beast of grief into these other women. That's what pushed me through my own journey, was to help somebody else. It's amazing how God can, turn your pain into somebody else's, passion and purpose. So that's the biggest activation of my faith.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, let's do this real quick. Let's welcome everyone at our Missouri City campus. We love you guys. West End, we love you guys. The men at God Behind Bars campus, we love you so much. Can you just welcome them here at Richmond for them? We love you guys. And then let's do this again. Can you give the most incredible round of applause for Liz? That took guts. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Well deserved. The amount of courage and bravery it takes for her to get up and to share not just the good, but some of the bad. And then she shared some of the darkest, deepest, and ugliest parts of what she's had to walk through in this life. Now, as you guys know, if you're new here, so am I. This is my second time to be here. I've gotten to sit under the leadership of her worship 2 times now. And just on her talent and singing chops alone, I love to worship with Liz, right? Isn't it be like, some people sing, she sangs, right? Like, when I sing, it's not pretty. I just sing. I'm a nerdy singer, but when she sings, she sangs, and I'm here for every last minute of it. That was beautiful today. But here's what's even more important. Think about this. This is the power of story. Because every one of us in here, we have a story. And it has good and it has bad and it even has some ugly. And when we as a community start to get vulnerable and courageous with our stories, we start to move closer to God because of the bravery and courage of other people. So think about this. Every time, and this goes for every worship leader at every campus, every time Liz gets up to sing now, we are accountable to sing along with her, knowing the fullness of her story. She has walked through every parent's worst nightmare. I have 4 kids myself. We were not originally designed to have to bury our kids. They're supposed to bury us, right? But this is part of her story. And what's so beautiful about it is when she's up here and she's doing all her runs and she's wailing and she's singing about the goodness of God and the faithfulness of God. Do you know how much those words cost her something? Like, do you know how much my walk with Jesus is inspired? Because knowing her story now and then watching her get up here and still in the midst of the hell she's had to walk through, proclaim the goodness of God. I got goosebumps right now. So thank you. And then the ultimate thing is that you not only walked through this pain and are still walking through this pain, but you decided to make a purpose out of it. She created a small group for women going through similar things and the same type of things where they could meet together and cry together and grieve together and laugh together and eat together and celebrate together and mourn together. This is God's original design for us as a community from the foundations of the world. This is why we spent this whole month at every campus promoting small groups, and you are leading the way, and I just wanted to honor you and say thank you. God bless you, Liz. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Man, that story was beautiful. Are you guys doing good this morning, this afternoon, whatever it is now? I don't even know. I'm so hyped up. I've had like 9 cups of coffee and an apple, so I'm just excited to be up here. We have the best news on planet Earth. I still cannot believe I get to preach the good news of Jesus Christ. It has never been lost on me. What a privilege. And so I'm going to jump right into it. If you have your Bibles, go with me to Matthew chapter 15. I feel selfish this weekend because this is literally one of my favorite passages in literally all of the Bible. To me, this is a Mount Everest type chapter in all of Scripture. There's 3 stories that Jesus tells, and if I could sum up these stories and the anthem of this story in just a couple of words, here's what I'd simply say. In Luke chapter 15, it's just 3 stories of God's amazing grace, right? How sweet the sound. This thing called grace, it's foreign to this world because the principles of grace are flipped upside down. They're completely and fundamentally different than the rules that we were born into this culture learning about. Because here's what grace is, y'all. And I'm not just giving you our English ideas of grace because we can use that word in so many different ways. I'm talking about when you crack open your Bibles and any time in the Old Testament Hebrew or in the New Testament Greek or Latin, whenever you see the word grace, here is exactly what the Word of God is talking about when it says grace. The grace of God is this. It is the unmerited, next word is key here, undeserved favor from God, right? I would put it this way in my simple terms. The grace of God is when He in His sovereign wisdom chooses to give us humans, us crazy humans, what we most need when we least deserve it. So I'm going to be working off of that definition this whole morning. I'm going to repeat that so many times if I do my job well. The grace of God is when He in His sovereignty and in His godly wisdom chooses to give us all what we most need exactly when we least deserve it. I think the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans in the New Testament, he said it best. While we were what? Yet sinners, Christ died. He didn't come at the opportune time. He didn't come at the time that it was best on planet Earth. It was crazy when He came into this world, but while we were yet sinners, He gave us what we most needed, the cross, and yet we least deserved. This is what Luke 15 is all about. So let me set it up. Here's what's happening. Jesus is about to teach some people some things because there's some chief elders and teachers of the law and some Pharisees. They were the power brokers of the day. Everyone wanted to be them. They had an incredible amount of influence, but they had a very rigid religious system, and Jesus was breaking all of the norms of the day. Jesus had one thing He did that particularly bothered them. It was who He hung out with. You ever been there? It was who He ate with. Tax collectors, sinners, Gentiles, people of other ethnicity and other race. Can you believe it? Other nationality. He would constantly be in their homes having food and having dinner with them. And it drove the religious people nuts because they were a people where they thought separation was the gracious thing and the holy thing to do. And so they're throwing shade at Jesus all the time. And I think He just hit a tipping point and He wasn't having it anymore. So He does something in Luke 15 that's unprecedented. He doesn't tell one story to teach about grace. He doesn't even double down and tell 2 stories. He does something that doesn't happen anywhere else in the Gospels. Jesus is so passionate about this currency of the kingdom of God that we call grace that He says, I'm going to tell them 3 stories just in case they don't get it. And so He starts out, and I'll just paraphrase the first 2 because we're going to get to the last one and my favorite one. He starts out talking about a shepherd, and he's given a parable. This was his favorite way to teach. He would make up a fictional story that never happened, but it's completely and 100% full of truth. If you're new to church, that's what a parable is. Fictional story full of truth. So that he tells a story about a shepherd who's got 100 sheep, and one day one of those sheep go wandering off and goes missing, and they've lost the sheep, and he does something crazy, because I don't know about you, I was horrible in school, so if I got 99 left, I'm pretty happy about that. I get a 99 anything, I'm letting that sheep go. I'm like, we're good. I still got 99. Everything's fine. He's an idiot anyways for leaving. He had it good here. What was he thinking? Go on, young fellow. I'm not going, right? Like, that's how I would think about it. But what's the word of God says? It says, no, the minute that sheep is found to be lost, he says, hey, y'all are safe here. You guys are good here. I got my 99 right where they're supposed to be. Give me a little bit. I'm going to go find this sheep. We're getting taught how passionate God is about lost people. And it says he goes off and he finds the sheep. And here's what's crazy. He does not give that sheep what the sheep deserves, which is a timeout, a probationary period, a good old-fashioned talking to. He doesn't hit him, right, with the stick or the thing. He doesn't do any of that. You know what the Bible says in Luke 15? It says he joyfully, when he finds him, joyfully. This is the heart of the God we serve. Puts him on his shoulders. I would never have done that. Be like, you're walking. In fact, put me on your back, sheep. I'm tired. But this is the beautiful heart of the God that we all came to all of our campuses to worship today. This gets me so excited. He joyfully, not begrudgingly, not annoyingly, puts him on his shoulders. In other words, I'm going to bear the weight of your weakness from wandering off and getting lost. I'm just so happy I found you and that I get to bring you home that I'm going to put your mess on my shoulders. This is the grace of God, giving this sheep exactly what he needed, but not what he deserved. So he doubles down and he tells the exact same story. He just switches up characters. He talks about a little old lady who has 10 precious coins that would have been a piece of jewelry to her, and she loses one of the 10 coins. Again, she's got 9 left. I'm good, right? Not her, though. It says she lights a lamp in the middle of the night and she sweeps her house. It's kind of like a lady in here if you would have lost your wedding ring, right? Like something so precious to you. Well, most of you ladies, some of you, not all. We're going to have a relationship series coming up. We'll talk about that. But keep going, Chad. Anyways. It says she does everything, and then it's so cool. It says when she finds it, she doesn't just get happy. Do you know what she does? She throws a party and invites friends and neighbors to celebrate with her. It's like this whole lost and found thing. It's a communal thing. And this is God saying, hey, this is something that I am absolutely, fundamentally most passionate about in my kingdom. Lost people matter to God. And when they come home, and when I find them, and when I put them on my shoulders and carry them home, guess what? We're going to party. We're going to celebrate. And I want to celebrate with you. He calls the friends and the neighbors. This in the story is talking about us. And here's what I glean from that is this. And I get the privilege of traveling every weekend to different cities all over the nation and getting to preach the gospel. And every church is a little different when it comes to their DNA. But one thing I have found to be true, and I can sense this in different churches, when you have a church that has a heart for the lost, there is a unique and beautiful and special spirit over that place. When you have a church that is burdened for lost people in their community, do you know what you have? You have the full backing and resources of heaven as a church at your disposal. Do you know why? Because Jesus said in Luke 15, he says, I tell you the truth that when one person who was lost is found, heaven goes crazy. Heaven starts to celebrate. Nothing triggers and trips heaven's excitement and joy and rejoicing more than when lost people come home. He goes, I tell you the truth, there's more rejoicing over one sinner who repents than 99 righteous people who don't need to repent. That's when heaven gets excited. And so now we get to where we'll camp, and I'm going to read a lot today. I've told you guys this in week 1. I'm dyslexic, so this could go really sideways really fast. But I'm going to read large portions of Scripture without giving a bunch of commentary because this story needs no help. It does the heavy lifting. It is beautiful. In fact, Mark Twain, arguably one of America's greatest writers in our 300-some-year history, he says this about the parable of the prodigal son. He says, it is the single greatest short story written in the history of the world. And Jesus makes it up on the fly. How awesome is God, right? Let's read. This is Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11. Jesus continued. In other words, here we're on to the third story. He's tripling down. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one, I grew up in a family of me and an older brother. I'm the youngest. I feel this. We're idiots. Anyways, the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided the property between them. Goes on to say, not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, and he set off for a distant country, and there he squandered all his wealth in wild living. He went to paint the sin town red, right? The young 20-something knows more than everybody else on planet Earth. Just give me something I haven't deserved, I haven't earned. Isn't that interesting on the front end of this story? He asked for something he's never merited. He's never earned. He simply gets it because of birthright. And the father, I would have thought, would have been like, "You're absolutely not getting that yet. You're way too young and dumb. I'm not doing that." But guess what the father is? Just, okay, go do what you have to do. And he does it, and it does exactly what I'm sure the father knew would happen. He squanders it in wild living. After he had spent everything, so now he's broke as a joke, right? There was a severe famine in that land, in the whole country, and he began to be in need. Goes on to say this. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now that might not be a big deal to you guys, but in ancient first century Judea, there was nothing dirtier according to the Levitical law than pigs. I personally love pig. Bacon to me is about the single most beautiful tasting thing on planet Earth. I will unapologetically eat as much bacon as possible, even if it sends me to an early grave. I'm going out eating me some bacon. How good is bacon, right? And one comedian said, "It is so good that we wrap bacon around other meats so that people enjoy the other meats better." That's how good bacon is. I'm preaching now. Feel it. But not in this culture though, right? Like pigs were as dirty and unclean as it got. In other words, this kid could not find himself in a more difficult and precarious situation. You want to talk about the shame and dishonor that comes with the fact that he's so desperate now, he finds himself doing the exact opposite of what he was born and raised and trained to do, which is working with the pigs. And he's also starving, right? There's a famine in the land. It says he longs to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Goes on to say this. When he came to his senses, famines have a way of doing that in our lives, do they not? Isn't that interesting how it works? They feel like judgment. Everything's vulnerable. Everything's weird. You don't know how you're going to make it through, but that's actually some of the moments God actually leverages most of his grace and goodness to bring us to our senses. This is what happens. He's starting to come to his senses, and he says this, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, his son, and I'm starving to death." And so he starts to create a plan. He's like, I'm going to set out, and I'm going to go back to my father. And then he does this, right? He starts to craft an apology letter, right? He says, and I'm going to say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned against you." All of that's true so far. I am no longer to be called your son. All of that's true so far. So just make me like one of your hired servants. And he got up, and he went to his father. Now, before we put that next slide up, I want you to think about what we're about to read. This is my absolute favorite part of this incredible story, what's about to be said next. It shows us the heart of God, because here's the truth. A bunch of you in this room and at West End and Missouri City, definitely at God Behind Bars, a bunch of you walk in here and you are at the point in your walk with God, or lack thereof, where you're just seeking him out. And that's beautiful. Welcome. This place was made for you. You're not sure, but you're curious. You're wondering. I don't know why you've gotten to that point. Maybe a famine hit in your life, some kind of famine. And it's starting to bring you to some senses. It's starting to get you to ask some of the tough questions like this kid asks. And it's starting to cause you to maybe take some steps in the direction of God. I just want you to know, if you're curious about this unseen God that we come here to worship and talk about all the time, will you just listen to what it says in this next couple of sentences so that you can start to get the heart of God? Because in this made-up story, the Father, spoiler alert, a lot of us understand this, but if you don't, the Father represents God in this. Listen to his heart. But while the kid was what? A long way off. I think of Romans again. While we were yet sinners, Christ died. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with what? Rage? Fury? Anger? Resentment? Disappointment? No. While he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. This is the heart of God people who are far from God. He then does what? He ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. This is unbelievable, but can we have an honest moment in church since we're in church? Let me be honest with you. When I read this, you know what I think? That's bad parenting, God. Right? I have 4 kids. I'm not sure that I have the capability under these particular circumstances to respond that way. Do you know what I would instinctually think would be the best parenting tactic to do with my kid if this was our story? It would be to watch him as he starts to walk home with his head down and his shoulders slumped and just be like, stay on the porch, Chad. Don't you dare walk after him. I want every step that he takes to come home. I want every one of those steps to hurt because I never want him to do this again. And I want every step that he takes home to be reminded of what he cost me and what he cost my reputation and what he cost my estate and what he cost my household. Every moment, every step that he takes towards me, I want him to sit under the weight of that shame. I want to leverage that shame so I can teach him a lesson. Doesn't that make some parental sense? Like a good time out? A good tongue lashing. I would have been talking so much trash on the way home. Oh, what, are you getting tired now? Where's all that money? You can't spend anything on. Oh, you don't have any servants to walk you home? Because guess what? I got a whole bunch of servants here if you just would have stayed. What? Keep walking, boy. That's what makes sense to me. Some tough loving, right? But I can't speak for me. What I would do doesn't matter. This is literally Jesus telling us this is the heart of God. You got to understand that. If you're new to church, please understand me. Anything Jesus does, talks about, lives like, it is giving us the perfect picture of what that unseen God in heaven is like. The book of Colossians says Jesus is the express image of the invisible God. In John chapter 1, it says, Jesus became the Word, and then the Word of God became flesh and dwelt among us, right? Jesus would often say, every time you hear me, you're hearing God. Every time you see me and what I'm doing, you're seeing God, because he is the sinless, perfected picture of what our God in heaven is like. And for whatever reason, in his infinite sovereignty, he chose this method, this thing called grace. And it is messy. And it is confounding sometimes, and it is dangerous sometimes, but this is what he chooses to do. Well, this kid was a long way off, filled with compassion, and now here's something interesting in this part. He runs to him. Now, that's no big deal to us. It's like, yeah, he missed him. It's cool. He's running after him. But here's the deal. He's an old man. And you know what he is? Because he has an estate. Everyone listening to Jesus' teachings would have known this because of their culture. Because he has an estate, he's a dignitary in the community. So he's an elder, he's a dignitary, he's incredibly successful to get to that point, he's wealthy, and he's known. Now, in the ancient first century culture, do you know what dignitaries would never be caught doing, ever? Running. Couple reasons. One, it was considered an undignified act for whatever reason. But 2, very practical reason, men wore robes back then. It's not an easy thing, right? Because here's what you had to do. In order to run as a man, you'd have to lift up the robe. Now, here's a third reason. I know times have changed a bit, but back in first century Judea, they were incredibly modest people, right? Didn't matter how hot and humid it was in that arid culture in Jerusalem. You didn't show leg, even if you were a dude, like ever. It just was undignified. Would have never been caught running in public, having to lift up his robe and get undignified. Everyone, when Jesus said that, would have been way more shocked than we are to hear that, because they would have been like, what? This makes no sense. To which Jesus would have been like, yeah, grace makes no sense. But it changes lives and changes hearts all over the globe. So what are we going to do, right? He runs to him. And here's what I've gleaned from that. We actually serve a God, church, who will become as undignified as he needs to bring lost people home. And I know that can be tough. Some of you thinkers in here are going, wait, a holy, righteous God would be willing to become undignified to bring lost rebels home like us? Absolutely. It's not my word. Remember, Jesus is the exact representation of the image of God. And what could be more undignified than Roman crucifixion, I ask? Think about that. You want to talk about becoming undignified to restore to us dignity. You want to talk about giving us something that we most need but least deserve. It is always and forever will be the cross of Jesus Christ. This is why we preach unapologetically the cross of Jesus Christ. This is why it is the best news on planet Earth. How undignified for the creator of the universe to subject himself to being paraded through the streets of Jerusalem while he is being spit on. That spit wouldn't have been possible without him speaking it into existence. And now he's letting people mock him with that spit. He's being punched. He's being joked about. He's being mocked. They put a crown of thorns on his head. He got whipped 39 times with what was called a cat o' nine tails. Eyewitnesses said that they couldn't even recognize that it was Jesus anymore by the time they got done whipping him, and they hadn't even put the cross on his shoulders yet. You want to talk about undignified, right? But this is the best news on planet Earth. Some of you need to be reminded of this today. God will proudly and unapologetically become as undignified as he needs to restore back to you dignity. I don't get it. It makes no sense. All I can do is sit back and sing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Thank you, Jesus, for saving a wretch like me, a rebel like me, a prodigal like me. Thank you, Jesus. Goes on to say this, the kid, I'm sure shocked by the hug and the kiss, he gets out his letter. I picture him having a letter, and he starts in on the crafted apology letter, right? And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That's all he gets out, and the father cuts him off, like he's not even hearing it. I love this about God. He's not even hearing it. Do you know what he does? He's just like, yeah, I heard you. Listen, you don't have to give me the apology letter because the minute you took a step home, I already knew by faith that was your I'm sorry. Same is true for you and I. You're a step away from the Father heart of God running to you in compassion. It's not harder than that. We love to make it religiously harder than that. It is not. You serve a God, you take one step even if it's full of shame. You take one step towards him even if it's full of condemnation. You take one step in the direction of God by faith even if it's full of fear. You serve a God who will sprint to you and become as undignified as he needs to restore back to you dignity. Why? Because he loves this world. Jesus said in John 3:17, I didn't come to condemn the world. I came to save it. You're wondering why I'm eating with tax collectors and sinners and all of the marginalized and the Gentiles. I didn't come here to condemn them. I didn't come here to separate myself from them. I came here to have dinner with them, to do life with them, to have small groups with them. Came here to save them. So the father just says this. He's not even hearing the apology. He goes, quick, bring the robe. The robe was a sign in that culture of your identity. This robe would have looked completely different than the robe of the servants and the slaves. So when he walked back into that house with such shame and embarrassment and regret, and so many people he knew in that house would be judging him for what he had gone and done, it didn't matter because the father said, no, he's still my son. Look at his robe. The Bible tells us in the New Testament, we have been clothed in robes of righteousness. This is your identity on your best day of living and on your absolute worst day because of Jesus Christ. Not because of your awesomeness, not because you and I get everything right, but because Jesus got everything perfect for us in our place. Not only a robe, though, he says, put a ring on his finger. Goes all Beyonce on him, right? If you like, puts a ring. That was dumb. I'm sorry. I'll move on. But the ring was a family signet. It was a family crest, and it represented authority, to which I go, that makes no sense. Kid doesn't need authority right now. He needs punishment. But he says, no. He's part of my family. Put the ring on his finger. Put sandals on his feet. I want everyone to know. And then this is my favorite part. Get the fattened calf and kill it. Now he's talking my language, right? Get the best ribeye we have. Get the Merlot that's been waiting for 20 years. Yeah, get that stuff out. We still have a DJ in my estate? Yeah. Get him. Let's go. My son was lost, but now he's found. Let's have a feast and let's celebrate. Isn't that amazing? My son was lost, but now he's found. Here's what I'm so passionately trying to get at, church, is something some of you may really already understand, but we can easily say this, but just go, yeah. This is not a cliche. This is fundamental to the story of God and creation. Lost things deeply matter to God. Lost people that we can get so tempted to judge and fight with and pile on because of their rebellion and because of their mistakes. The Father, just remember, he doesn't pile on one bit. Isn't that freeing when you think about it? If he doesn't feel the need to pile on, I sure as an imperfect human don't need because here's the truth about life. Life will pile on without any help from God or us. God told us that. In Galatians 5, it says, a man just reaps what he sows. The kid would have amened this. It says, if you sow to your sinful nature, you're just going to reap destruction. And God doesn't want that. It says, but if you sow to your spirit, if you come back home and sow to your spirit, you're going to reap life. There's parties awaiting you. Like there's good news and health and healing on the other side. So just come home. And so they have a party and they begin to celebrate. And man, I gotta wrap this thing up. So I'll land the plane this way. In the mid-90s, there's a sociology professor out of Philadelphia, renowned professor. He also, though, moonlighted as a prolific author and as actually a preacher. His name's Dr. Tony Campolo. He's in his late 80s now. And he was telling a story about getting a call to go and preach at a pastor's conference in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm still waiting for that call. Would love that one, right? Suffering for Jesus in Hawaii. He gets this call to go speak to a bunch of pastors at a conference in Hawaii. So, of course, he says yes. And he gets on a plane, and Philadelphia and Honolulu are 6 hours apart, time-wise. So he gets to his hotel, and by 5 in the evening, he's in bed. Because to him, it's 11 at night, right? And he says, so I ended up getting up at about 2 in the morning, and I woke up and my body thought it was time for breakfast, and I was famished and I was starving. So against my better judgment, I got my clothes on. I walked out of the hotel. He said back then, Honolulu in the middle of the night, downtown was not a good place to be. It was sketchy. He said, so I tried to, as quick as possible, find any place that was open that was serving food. He goes, I found one place with the lights on, and the sign said Gus's Diner. And so I went up to the cash register, and I ordered a donut, and I ordered a cup of coffee, and I introduced myself to the guy at the cash register. He actually said his name was Gus. He was the owner of the place. Said there was, because of the middle of the night, there was only 2 or 3 other people in there eating. And so he said, I sat down with my coffee and my donut, and I just started to eat quietly. And then he said, about 5 minutes into me having my breakfast, he said, just 10 or 12 loud, boisterous, and he said, scantily dressed women came in talking some of the most vulgar language that he could hear. He goes, I deduced pretty quickly what I was dealing with. This was 10 or 12 prostitutes that had just walked into the diner. He could tell. He goes, and so all of a sudden, all these bells and whistles are going off on my head, and my forehead's starting to sweating because I'm realizing you just got invited to Honolulu to speak at a pastor's conference, and it is 3 in the morning, and you are at a diner with 12 prostitutes. This is not good for the optics right now, right? So he goes, everything in me said, just get up and leave. So I was getting ready to get up and leave, and he said, something in me goes, I'd like to look back on it now and think it was the Spirit of God. Something in me would not let me leave. And I stayed a little longer, and he said, two of the women came and sat right next to me. And so I just started eavesdropping on their conversation. And he said one of the girls who he would later go on to know was named Agnes. She looked at her friend, and she said, hey, guess what? Her friend said, what? He goes, tomorrow's my birthday. He said her friend looked at her and goes, so Agnes, who cares? We're old. Doesn't matter. What do you want? You want a party? What, you want a cake, Agnes? And she goes, I'm sorry, whatever. I was just telling you it was my birthday. I don't want anything. And then she said this, and it wrecked him. She goes, besides, why would I want a party? I've never had a birthday party in my life. Yeah, just, right? Kind of gives you maybe some backstory into how she got where she was at. Not justifying or anything, but just going, man, behind everybody's prodigal story, there's a backstory that got people there. Not one of us in this room, or not one of the people that are far from God in our community woke up one day and said, I'm just going to destroy my life for fun. Right? People have stories. And those stories, even the ugly parts, are sacred to God. Because people are sacred to God. He goes, wait, this girl's she's never had a special day dedicated to her by her friends and family to be affirmed and to be celebrated and to be extra loved on for that day. We all need that. We all deserve that, right? She's never had a birthday party. He said a few minutes later, the ladies got up and they exited the place. And on his way out, he went and said goodbye to Gus. And he said, hey, Gus, one quick question. Can I ask you a favor? Do you know those ladies that came in here? He goes, I know them all by name. They come in here every night. He goes, every night? He goes, like clockwork. He goes, could I ask you something? He goes, shoot. He goes, if I came back an hour earlier tomorrow night than I came this morning, and I brought like a birthday cake and some streamers and some balloons, and I'm going to make some happy birthday, I think her name's Agnes. He goes, yeah, he goes, I'm going to make some happy birthday Agnes signs. Would you let me set those up in here? And would you let me throw her an impromptu birthday party? Because she told me she's never had a birthday party before, and I can't live with that. Gus goes, man, I'm in. He goes, all right, I'll bring all that tomorrow night. Thank you so much. He goes, you're not bringing the cake. I'm the chef. That one's on me. I got it. I'm making the cake. He goes, I'll see you tomorrow night. And then he went back and he got ready to give his big talk to the pastors' conference, right? A room like this full of dignitaries and pastors and special important people. And he doesn't say this in the story, but I've had a decade to think about it. How awesome would it have been when it was his session if he got up with those pastors and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I will not be having a session right now. It's postponed. If you'd like to be a part of my session on how to be a better pastor, I'd like to invite you to Gus's Diner at 3 in the morning because we're going to throw a party for a prostitute. Forget the sermon. We're going to go out and we're going to learn some things together, what it looks like to shepherd some lost people. Go looking for them when they're lost. Right? How cool would that have been? That's my version, though. He goes the next night, sets up the party. They got in cahoots with Agnes's friends, so one of the friends brought her in a little bit later than the rest of the ladies. They all came in, and then all of a sudden in came following Agnes, and in unison they all start singing happy birthday to her. And Dr. Campolo said literally they had to get a stool from the diner for her to sit in as they started singing because her legs were starting to buckle because she was caught off guard so much. You could imagine, right? No, it couldn't have been less expected. You know what I think's happening here in this moment, though? I think she's getting something she deeply, deeply, deeply needed and totally didn't deserve. It's the grace of God, y'all. It's medicine for the lost soul. It's medicine for the found soul, is it not? I'll never quit drinking from that fountain, ever. And he says she was taken aback, and when they finished singing the song, she was just staring at the cake in dead silence. And then finally Gus broke the silence and goes, Agnes, cut the cake, come on. Let's go. We want to eat. Cut the cake. And she said, Gus, could I ask a favor? He's like, what? She goes, could I just take this somewhere real fast, please? I promise I'll come back, but could I just take this somewhere real fast? He goes, your birthday. Do what you want. And Dr. Campolo said she walked out the door. No one knew where she went, and he never saw her again. It's like, sorry, I don't have a red bow to put on the end of this story. Never saw her again. Don't know where she went. And he's like, now I'm sitting there in a room 2 nights in a row full of prostitutes, and I'm a pastor. What do you do? He's like, so I said, hey, you guys want to pray for Agnes? They started to pray for Agnes, pray for her protection, pray for her wholeness, pray that God would be with her, pray that she'd have more and more birthday parties. And then they said amen, and very soberly and quietly, the ladies trickled out. He said he was cleaning up and he was getting ready to leave and thank Gus, and Gus came up to him and went, hey, you didn't tell me you were like a preacher guy. He goes, guilty. Yeah, I am. He goes, what kind of church you go to anyways? And Dr. Campolo says, I don't know if this was God or not, but it felt like the Spirit of God. I just looked at him and I said, Gus, I go to a church that throws parties for prostitutes at 3 in the morning. Yeah, I love it. He said, Gus looked back at him and goes, no, you don't. He says, there's no church like that. He goes, if there was, I'd go to it. Right? Got to listen sometimes to the Gus's. So if there was a church that really meant that kind of business, I'd go to it. Giving people what they most need, but least deserve in their most vulnerable, difficult times, the unmerited, undeserved favor of God. This is who we are called to be, church. I'll end with this verse, Matthew chapter 9, verse 13. This is Jesus talking. Who needs a doctor, he says, the healthy or the sick? Go and figure out what this scripture means. I'm after mercy, not religion. I'm here. This one always wrecks me. I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. The single most beautiful thing that this church can and will ever be. And you know why I came back a second time when I was invited? Because I believe with every fiber of my bone, this church is this. It's this value. We as the church exist to be a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. You understand that? We are a hospital. This is what God has asked us. This is what he's invited us in and called us to be for each other. And for those who don't even know about this place in our community yet, to be more of this room every weekend in Missouri City and West End and God Behind Bars, our facilities should act more like a triage unit than a country club. You understand that? People are coming in vulnerable and hurting and lost and ashamed and full of fear and condemnation, and we have the medicine for them. It's not us, it's the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ that cost him everything. Let's not waste him becoming so undignified on the cross and not share that with people. And when people least deserve it but most need it, let's be the people that give that to them. Amen? There will be a blessing of God on this church if we can do that. I'm going to get fired for going over my time. So do you guys mind if I just pray and then send us out of here in peace and grace? Jesus, I thank you for every person in the sound of my voice. I am so grateful you gave me the privilege to brag on you, Jesus, to preach the gospel yet again from another angle. And Jesus, I pray your blessing on this place. I pray that every single person at every campus walks out of these doors better than we walked in. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Love you guys.